Diablo 2 is the best ARPG ever made, and that's a hill I and many other Chad ARPG enjoyers are more than willing to die on. So, when I heard about Project Diablo 2, a mod that dares to ask the question, what if Diablo 2 never stopped being developed, I was more than a little excited to check it out. Considering that the existing coverage for this mod is unorganized or, completely off topic, I figured I'd put this video together to highlight just what the mod is, and some of the various changes that I found divisive when I first started playing it. Now, I don't want to be hypercritical of the mod because, honestly, the folks behind PD2 have done something incredible. They've effectively rebalanced the entire game, including all the skills, rune words, and set items, and even thrown in endgame to boot. You get the idea, lots and lots of changes. Something that modern Blizzard is either uninterested or completely incapable of doing.
Disappointed!
But I also feel like PD2 has, whether knowingly or not, fallen into a lot of the same traps that modern Blizzard games do. And while I love PD2, and I have my doubts that I'll be returning to vanilla anytime soon, there are a few new mechanics and changes that really rubbed me the wrong way, at least initially. Just a forewarning, I'm going to assume you're at least somewhat familiar with Diablo 2 if you're watching this video, so I won't be discussing the base game all that much, because you've had over 20 years to play it for yourself. Now, a little history lesson for you first. I'm by no means a god-tier fan of the game. My exposure to Diablo 2 was making it to Act 2 when I was like 12, before my brother and his friends quickly outleveled me and left me in the dust. It was only recently, I want to say maybe 2021, that I actually sat down and played through the whole game proper, completing each difficulty after banging my head against a wall with my werebear druid. I fell head over heels in love with the game, and it's basically become a part of my daily routine. Log in, blast through packs of mobs for a while, and never find the bear rune I've been looking for over 100 hours. I've never been a ladder player, and instead play the game self-found and solo only, so if that automatically makes you dismiss my opinion, fair enough, I can't stop you. So, why am I telling you this? Well, I think it's important because PD2 might hit completely differently if you've been playing the game for 20 years and want a fresh experience. Personally, I think part of my issue engaging with PD2, at least initially, was due to how it was pitched to me. Diablo 2, but with a proper endgame, and honestly, I feel like that couldn't be further from the truth. Frankly, there have been so many fundamental changes made within PD2 that the two games are almost beyond comparison. Things like melee splash, the ridiculous amount of balance changes, no run-walk defense penalty, and an insane buff to both enemy density and drop chances have altered the experience almost beyond recognition. I'm going to be very critical of a few of the major changes PD2 brings to the table throughout this video. But again, I want to stress that I think PD2 is an incredible labor of love, and despite all the things I'm about to complain about, I really do adore it. It clearly resonates with a lot of hardcore D2 fans as well, and it would be completely unfair of me to say the changes it brings have no merit. Let's circle back to Melee Splash for a minute. One of the biggest changes PD2 makes to Diablo 2 is the addition of melee damage propagating out to other mobs within range. If you successfully land a hit, all the fuckwads within several yards of you will drop dead. This is a great change, but I was completely torn on it for a long time. On one hand, it's a big balancer for character classes that are melee focused. Gone are the days where the only class that could really reliably clear screens in seconds was the Sorceress. But on the flip side, I think it completely gutted a lot of the complexity of melee, at least until you get into Hell difficulty and mapping. In vanilla D2, positioning is a huge factor when you play a melee class. You have to be aware of where your character is at all times, lest you be put in hit recovery and put down like the dog you are. And while this is still true in PD2, Melee Splash effectively removes this aspect from the early game. You can simply run headlong into huge groups of enemies, put them all in hit recovery before they even have a chance to swing at you, and watch as the whole pack melts before your eyes. Which, is fucking awesome. Like, how could you dislike that? Well, huge changes to the formula like this can have unintended consequences. And in my opinion, this has the knock-on effect of basically removing a lot of the variety between mobs throughout the early game. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Diablo 2 has a very diverse set of mobs in its roster. It doesn't. But it's diverse enough that enemies feel distinct from one another, especially these little fuckers. But when you can blitz through entire packs of mobs before they even get a single attack off, they start to feel very samey very quickly. Worse though is the impact this change has on the game's difficulty. The PD2 devs seem to have taken a page out of modern Blizzard's book by trivializing almost the entire game until you get to the end of it. Brace yourself for a bit of an unhinged rant here, but do you know what phrase gamers love to repeat that really gets under my skin? Oh, you haven't put in X number of hours? Or, oh, you haven't reached this part of the game? No wonder you didn't like it. That's some weapons-grade copium right there. I hate to break it to you, but if a game is not fun until the 100-hour mark, it's not fun. That's called the sunk cost fallacy. You can't seriously expect someone to put 100 hours into a game they're not enjoying, because they won't. Most of us will simply get bored and move on to something that is more entertaining to us. So, why am I ranting about this? Well, PD2 is balanced around its endgame, and unfortunately, I've seen the same argument repeated when discussing the mod and its difficulty. If you've been playing the game for 20 years and are sick of running Bale, I sympathize. But in my opinion, the endgame being the focus is not an adequate replacement for the challenge and fun of the journey to it. To be fair though, once you get to the end of Nightmare and into Hell, the difficulty does ramp up considerably, which isn't a surprise since the same could be said about Vanilla D2. But overall, I think PD2 is painfully easy until you get to that point. Normal is a complete joke, and so is most of Nightmare, something I can't say about Vanilla D2. Difficulty is a super subjective thing though, so if you disagree with me, that's fine. But Diablo 2 is a time sink. It can take a long time to grind a character up to higher levels, and while it can be argued it's not especially challenging once you know what you're doing, you absolutely can get murked by basic mobs, no matter how far in or what level you are. Meanwhile, as I've run my Barb character through PD2, I've been willing myself to die, while not actively trying to, and it's only until I got to Hell that the difficulty became truly engaging. Challenge is a hugely important part of game design, and to nix the challenge of simply running through Normal and Nightmare seems incredibly short-sighted to me. Mind you, I don't think it's deliberate. Rather, I think it's just an unfortunate side effect of making so many, very positive I may add, balance changes. Diablo 2 doesn't have an endgame comparable to most modern ARPGs, but it was at least fun and challenging to level characters through the 5 acts of each difficulty over and over. And I think that's partly why people have been playing the game for so damn long. So, to completely do away with balancing the majority of the leveling experience and instead focusing solely on the endgame seems like a huge oversight to me. Speaking of oversights, though, I'm probably alone with this opinion. Removing the defense penalty from running kneecaps the complexity of melee classes even further. In Vanilla D2, if you're running and a mob takes a swing at you, it's a guaranteed hit if you're within range. This encourages you to swap back and forth between running and walking while you're in melee to get the best of both. Or stick with running and rely on your speed and movement to avoid incoming attacks. But in PD2, this has been completely removed. There's no longer any point to walking even being present in the game. It feels completely detached from the experience. Like the vestigial legs on a whale, it no longer serves any purpose. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about the loot. Diablo 2 has damn near, at least in my opinion, perfect loot. Drops are infrequent, and finding a meaningful upgrade to replace your existing gear can take ages, but the result is a system that keeps you hooked. Even if a piece of gear is worthless to you, it's always exciting to see something legendary drop, if for no other reason than the chance that it's an upgrade. PD2, on the other hand, takes a page out of Diablo 3 seemingly, and utterly drowns you in loot. The enemy density has been bumped up to accommodate how insanely powerful you are from the get-go, and so have the loot drops. This in turn makes items like jewels, gems, runes, and even uniques feel far less valuable, while legendary drops are so frequent that I stopped bothering to even look at them for a huge chunk of my playtime. This is probably among the more divisive changes the mod makes, because Diablo 2's loot is one of the things the game receives universal praise for. Okay, granted, you could play Diablo 2 for 20 years and never see a bear rune, but maybe that's the point. I don't know. Call me an asshole, but I found the loot in PD2 to just be less rewarding than the base game, and I blame that entirely on how frequently you get drops. That's not to say it's bad by any means. Hell, it's still Diablo 2. It's even a huge upgrade in some regards, as the loot that does drop can be far more diverse. But I for one just prefer the way Vanilla D2 handles the scarcity of its loot. I don't think it was a bug, it was a feature, and I personally preferred it when I got excited to see yellow name tags, even if they weren't upgrades for my class. Okay, so that was a whole lot of negativity all at once. How about I talk about some positives to close this video out? Well, for starters, the addition of dedicated charm slots is a huge boon for the game. Gone are the days where charms take up 90% of your inventory. You can actually carry more than 1 or 2 pieces of loot back to town in the endgame, and that's a great change. While we're talking about the inventory, it has additional space to boot. Same thing with the Heraldric Cube and your stash. Gems and runes are now stackable, so you can have 1,000,000 of them and still have room for more gear. If you're playing a ladder character, you even get shared stash tabs, which is fucking awesome. As I've mentioned a few times now, all the classes and skills have been completely rebalanced and reworked, meaning build diversity in PD2 is far greater than anything you'll find in Vanilla D2. I ran a Frenzy Barb for my main in PD2, and let me tell you, it's way more satisfying here. Set items have been balanced to actually be useful. Now you might stop to consider whether it's worth equipping them for their set bonuses instead of instantly throwing them in the bin. Similarly, rune words have been balanced and nerfed, meaning they're no longer the de facto best weapons in the game by a long shot. Drops can now spawn with more unique and varied modifiers, which is great! To boot, a new resource, Worldstone Shards, can be used to corrupt your gear and roll additional stats that make them even more god tier. The mapping system, oh my god! This basically deserves its own video. Effectively riffs from Diablo 3, these are a hugely welcomed addition. Maps start to drop once you get into Hell and can be augmented with items like Worldstone Shards or new vendor items you can buy from Anya. These maps roll randomized effects such as lowering your resistances or even better magic item find, and can give you a proper means to grind all the way to level 99 if you so choose. No longer do you have to endlessly grind Bale. This offers so much more variety for endgame activities than Vanilla D2, it's not even funny. The only maybe downside to this is that each map has a limited number of layouts associated with it. They're not randomized like the vanilla acts, so I imagine after like 1700 runs, they maybe start to get a little stale. However, since the best Blizzard could do was add level scaling terror zones to clear, which, funnily enough, also exist in PD2, it's no contest here. PD2 wins hands down. All the mercs have been balanced and are now actually useful in the endgame, and they have new slots for gear they previously couldn't equip. PD2 even took the opportunity to add a brand new merc, the Ascendant, or a mage, which is awesome. I'd personally love to see them go even further with this and add an assassin and druid merc, if for no other reason than to just have more options. But perhaps the most important change, the game is upscaled and rendered at 60 FPS thanks to the D2 GL wrapper. No longer is D2 capped at 25 FPS, making your eyes bleed from mediocrity. This shit was fine in 2001, not so much in 2023. There's also HD text and all the sprites have been upscaled as well. It's definitely not as pretty as D2R, but these changes give the game a much needed facelift. I personally have always loved the stylized graphics of D2, so it's awesome to see them receive some love from the community as well. I could go on and on, but That would balloon the length of this video, and I wrote this script to focus primarily on the changes that didn't click with me until many hours in. I want to stress that despite my negativity, I really came around to a lot of the major changes in the mod once I got to Hell, but I almost shelved it several times while making my way through Normal and Nightmare due to sheer boredom, and I think it's important to address or at least acknowledge that those issues exist. I would love to see the mod team spend some time balancing the base game, so it's not such a chore to progress through, because PD2 is incredible, but I imagine there is a decent chunk of players who will never get to experience the mod at its best because they get bored before they can see it. If you agree with me or think I'm a brainlet, please let me know. I'm genuinely curious if other folks out there had a hard time getting into PD2 for similar reasons that I discussed. Ultimately, though, despite all the time I've just spent criticizing and complaining about the various changes in PD2, I still absolutely love it. Once you get used to how things work within the mod, it's genuinely difficult to go back. Plus, you can play PD2 without an always online connection, so for that reason alone, it's an 11 out of 10.